challenges this generation is facing, and that is climate change. In order to adequately address this crisis, we must aggressively tackle the root causes, the risks, the economic impact, and public health hazards that climate change poses, particularly, I want to emphasize, in underserved working class and minority populations. I support the spirit of the Green New Deal, and I co-sponsor the non-binding resolution because we must acknowledge that bold action needs to be taken to address this century-old trend that threatens our world. The work of this Congress and this committee, however, is to turn that vision into reality. It's time that we put pen to paper, roll up our sleeves, and convert bold ideas into actionable policy changes. I'm proud that this committee is doing that. The fact is that climate change will result in more extreme weather events and put more strain on our already crumbling infrastructure. During the last polar vortex in Chicago, 2 steel beams supporting Lakeshore Drive along the lakefront cracked, as did transit rail in Minneapolis, as demonstrated in our successful reversals of the Chicago River to protect Lake Michigan as a freshwater source. Innovative, resilient infrastructure is in Chicago's blood. Much of Chicago's existing infrastructure, however, was built in reaction to environmental challenges that we have faced historically, but decisions made decades ago left communities of color out. I raise this because as we consider the long-term infrastructure investment, we must seek more equity in legislation that will have decades-old consequences. Too many communities have been left behind without adequate mobility, are at a higher risk of extreme weather events, and are disproportionately exposed to toxic air and water. Chicago recently received an F for air quality from the American Lung Association, and according to the EPA, 8% of Hispanic children in the U.S. have asthma compared to 6.5 nationally. Hispanic children in the U.S. are almost twice as likely to be hospitalized for asthma than white children. Failing to address climate change hurts, but it hurts communities of color more severely. Looking ahead, the question before us now is, what policies do we change and how? According to 2016 data from the EPA, emissions from residential and industrial buildings as well as from transportation emissions account for nearly 40% of greenhouse gas emissions. Electricity generation accounts for nearly 30%. In short, we need cleaner transit and more energy-efficient structures because they have tremendous returns on investment. In Chicago, we've committed to converting our bus fleet to 100% electric by 2040. The city has reduced its overall carbon emissions by 11% from 2005 through 2015, while jobs grew 7%, dispelling the myth that greening our industry weakens our economy. Our conversion of over 270,000 streetlights to LEDs in 4 years will yield a savings of $100 million over a 10-year period. Our comprehensive approach to green infrastructure will make us more resilient. As a matter of fact, I would like to enter into the record a comprehensive report issued by the City of Chicago entitled Resilient Chicago, which details a roadmap forward for our city. And this will be in place as Chicago goes to the polls today to elect a new mayor and a city council. We may have to do a runoff in April, but that will be a fact. I'd like to direct a question to Ms. Arroyo, as I have about 30 seconds left, and that is, in your testimony, you discussed the historical burdens disproportionately shouldered by low-income communities. Can you discuss how climate change heightens those discrepancies for communities of color or low-income individuals, and what federal programs can help to reverse years of inequitable planning and development?
So thank you for the question. I'm happy to follow up in writing at more length, but just quickly, things like urban heat island effect that have a disproportionate effect on places that are really surrounded by concrete and don't have a lot of green space, flood-prone areas like the ones that we work with in DC. And I will give a shout out to Chicago for its early leadership on mitigating some of those impacts and being a leader on climate adaptation, as we often call it. But we do a lot of work with communities also on looking at the impacts of climate change from transportation infrastructure. And one of the things that we learned on the Future of the Interstate Highway report is that many cities are interested in trying to reverse those trends about building through cities that cut through cities without the participation of the communities. And some cities like here in Washington, D.C. are actually undergrounding or taking down some of the stretches of the interstate that really carve through some of the neighborhoods and trying to reconnect those neighborhoods. Happy to talk to you at more length about other options as well.
Thank you much.
Thank you, Mr. Garcia. Thank you to the witnesses for your